Hi, my name is Dylan Martin. I'm a senior editor at CRN, and today I'm joined by Andy Lin, who is Vice President of Strategy and Innovation and CTO of Mark III Systems. You guys have won a bunch of Nvidia partner awards in the last few years at least, right?
Yes, we have. And thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. Yeah, we've been honored to work very closely with NVIDIA on supporting organizations on building out their AI, HPC, and digital twin centers of excellence. And we've been fortunate enough to be recognized with a few different awards over the last few years.
Yeah, so what I wanted to talk to you about is this idea of AI factories. We've seen Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, talk about this idea a lot. And first, I wanted you to just define what that means, but then talk about how is your company actually like making that happen? And can you make it happen? Like, is it actually something that uh, organizations can achieve?
Yes. So an AI factory is how we define it. It's basically a centralized resource managed by potentially by one team at one point, but that can serve a large audience of builders that are training, inferencing, and using different AI models to do different things, who all have separate needs around, IDE frameworks, tool sets, and how they do things, and also different business objectives. So how do you drive centralization so that you can harness all the advantages of efficiency, having the data all in one place, but then also give everybody, every builder out there, their own individuality, right? To be able to build the transformational things that they individually need for their business, their research institution, their hospital, whoever that institution might be. And when
So,
you talk about
yeah.
it like this, it seems simple in practice, simple in words, but it's actually very difficult and it's an ongoing journey. So,
Mhm.
but yes, absolutely. That's how we an area that we're strongly focusing right now.
And so this is really like, a data center of sorts, but it's very different than a traditional data center.
It is. It's diametrically opposite to how most of the industries worked over the years. Obviously, you have the technological aspects of it, basically with a shared platform that can scale, powered by GPUs, storage, networking, yes. But more importantly, there's a software stack on top of it that allows you to take basically components and transform that into tooling and capabilities. And then on top of that, and it's an area that's not really talked about very much, is really the idea of being able to enable builders, right? So an AI factory is typically talked about, I think, in industry parlance around technology, but we only view it as half the equation. The other half of the equation is the human side and the team side. How do you enable the factory to be used by all these individual data scientists, researchers, whoever your builders might be, in a way that's in line with how they're used to training models? Like I said, if you build one tool in one way, but you don't think about your users, I think you've completely lost the whole point of why you're doing this. And
Mhm.
to do that, you really yourself have a cross-functional way of looking at how do you engage with technology teams? How do you engage with users? How do you engage with leadership to achieve their objectives? And each layer of that engagement is fundamentally different with fundamentally different skill sets.
Now, for all the like AI infrastructure deployments you have worked on, do you know when it is actually an AI factory and it's doing what an AI factory is supposed to be doing? Like, have you reached that point with any deployments?
I think an AI factory is more, I think, of a generic term that defines the ongoing journey to achieve what, I've just described. I don't think it's just, it's not a SKU you roll out. It's not a product you buy, right? But it's the idea of how do you drive ongoing centralization to do something that the organization finds attractive, but allow all your builders who are training the models that will transform your organization and take you over the next 10 to 20 years. How do you allow them to build, iterate, test, deploy, and do it all over again in a high velocity way where each of them individually are not interrupted? And like I said, it's very difficult because we all hear horror stories about you roll out a platform and you tell a user what they're going to be doing and they say, no, thanks. I can do it myself. And nothing's more true than around AI because it's so open source and community driven. That's how it grew up and that's how it will always be. So how do you balance that out? And that's the really tricky part about achieving, I think, the vision of AI Factory ongoing. And I think that's really the true essence of what it is.
Hmm. Now, you talked about this idea of AI centers of excellence, and I know we've talked about this before in the past. You can just talk about how that plays into supporting AI factory projects.
Absolutely. So when I talk about an AI center of excellence, the reason why I use that term often versus just a factory is that a couple of reasons. One is that it's half people, process, culture, half technology. I think we're all in the technology industry. Yes, platform tooling, that's important. But if people don't want to use it, and you can't build an organization around how to support it and run it long term, both symbiotically, then it really doesn't matter. There's a lot of instances in this industry of folks rolling out these quote unquote AI factories, and no one will use it or it can't stay up because it's really hard to do, right? And I think maintaining that idea of how do you engage with users and leadership and making sure that people can actually use the tooling while working with technology teams to keep the platform up is really the key to making that all happen. And I like to talk about the center of excellence because, like I said, that points to the idea that it's not necessarily a standardized thing. I think just the nature of open source means that if you build a stack that's quote unquote an AI factory, it's probably 50 to 60 to 70 different types of code that sits on top of each other that all need to interoperate with each other for it to work. It's a very, very delicate process where if one of them changes, it breaks everything, right? It's not something that people like to talk about, but it's true, right? So, how do you actually build an apparatus to be able to keep that up and then make sure that users can use it without the human side, without the human elements, without thinking about the user and how to keep it up? It's not going to work. So, I wish everything could be standardized. I wish everything could be push a button and you buy one thing and it works for everybody. But that's not the nature of open source and how this industry grew up. Right? That's not how communities will ever be, because if you do that, you slow innovation and you slow these models down to a halt. And that's
Hmm.
simply not acceptable. So what has to happen is all of us have to adjust. We all have to be able to build the muscle and the apparatus to be able to support this. And that requires a different approach than any other segment in technology up to this point.
So I guess last question, how do you know you're successful with, projects like these?
Well, I think number one, does your AI factory stay up? And does it stay serviceable? And are people complaining? Right. That's one, right? Two, are the models being trained and being deployed and being used impacting the business? And I think you'll know pretty quickly if you're being effective or not. The way I think about it is if you can deploy a factory and keep it up and keep it operational and make sure that people can use it, each individual user, that's the key, right? Because the users are the ones that have the ideas, that are doing their life's work, that are going to be able to transform the company, the organization, the research institution, the university, the country, the state that they're working in, right? And your job is basically just make sure that they can do it unblocked, right? You're not going to do the work for them, right? They've been dedicating their whole life to their area of science, their area of engineering, the product they've been building. But what you can do is you can make sure that they can work in a high velocity iterative way. Because at the end of the day, if you can do more iterations than anybody per unit time, you're going to win, right? Regardless of what you're doing, what product you're building, what research you're doing. And our goal is to be able to enable them to do that, right? Notice I didn't necessarily talk about technology there, right? When I'm talking about the AI Factory. The AI Factory is the ability to give builders the ability to iterate as quickly as they can through whatever means necessary. And obviously, it helps to have tooling to train models because that's part of the iteration. But the other part is just making sure that they can work within the context of those tools, right? And whether that be education, enablement, troubleshooting what they're doing, right? Making sure the documentation is solid because the documentation in this space, unfortunately, often isn't optimal. Um, so that's really part of the equation. If you think about it like that and you put yourself in the shoes of how do you make that amazing person do their work, I think everything takes care of itself. But like I mentioned, because the nature of this space and how it's been always open source driven, and you have 10,000 different ways of the same thing, the way you service, the way you build the factory, the way you make sure it stays up and ongoing is fundamentally different than any other, I think, any other paradigm within this industry up to this point.
Andy, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you around.
Thanks for having me on.